Do you know what separates a high-class intellectual who is well-read on fiction from a basement-dwelling nerd who is incapable of handling reality and thus escapes into fictional worlds? Arrogance, mostly. That's the answer. It's arrogance. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the term genre ghetto, but if you're not, it basically describes the fact that no matter how good a fantasy or science fiction novel you write, it will never be regarded as being literary fiction. By literary fiction, I mean the things that are the classics or which evoke the classics. The high art literature. You know, the novel about the 19th century South African piano maker who has to sail a slave ship to India to pay off his debts and keep his workshop from going under. It's an interesting story, really. The type of thing that might win you a Literature Nobel Prize. This is a book that will be discussed on public access television shows by very important and intellectual academics with canes and glasses and catheters. Right? The type of people who chuckle at quips and use the biggest words they have in their repertoire so they can mask the vapidity of their statements. Right, that very same novel about a 23rd century South African cyber piano maker who travels aboard a slave spaceship to Mars to pay his debts and keep his workshop from going under, and those very same people would not even deign to look in the direction of such utter drivel. Genre fiction. It's literally the same story, but except it's science fiction. And because it's science fiction, it's genre fiction. And genre fiction is bad because it is not complex and intellectually valuable. It doesn't matter that the physics for the sci-fi novel are just as well researched as the 19th century terminology in naval culture for the fiction piece, right? It's still genre, and therefore it's garbage. And that is something that just slightly irks me. Just to make this clear, I have absolutely no problem with literary fiction, with the vast majority of literary fiction, all the people who write it. It's just that the people who tend to read it, and only it, on a matter of principle, tend to be fucking dicks. For the sake of simplicity, let's call them lit fascists. There's actually quite a lot of literary fiction that you should read, like pretty much everything that George Orwell has ever written, or The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, or, you know, Shakespeare. Except don't bother with Hamlet. It is the dullest shit you can imagine. It is so impossibly dull. I fell asleep reading it. Pretty much everyone reads nowadays, so the people with inferiority complexes, who define themselves as being better than everyone else by the fact that they are reading, needed an additional layer to separate themselves from the filthy rabble of lesser readers who read genre fiction by inventing literary fiction. This is why the distinction between literary fiction and just genre fiction is so incredibly serious in the first place, right? And the best thing is that it is 100% arbitrary bullshit. Fantasy, for instance, very universally considered to be genre fiction and not the good literary fiction. Except if you write a novel about a French shape-shifting fairy that hangs out with angels and unicorns as she follows the Crusades to Jerusalem, well, that's literary because that's magical realism. Why? Well, because it was written in Spanish, of course, and we need to appear cosmopolitan and cultured. Magical realism is literally just a subgenre of fantasy, one that I am very fond of. I love magical realism, but it is a subgenre of fantasy and shouldn't be considered literature by the rules of literature. Except it is considered literature by the people who enjoy literature because somebody decided that it was literature. But hold the phone. Doesn't the Wave Runners trilogy literally tick every single box on the magical realism checklist? If so, why then is it considered to be fantasy and not proper literature? Well, the answer is quite simple. It's a young adult novel. And reading is supposed to be for intellectual grown-ups who read serious books and wear ties. Therefore, this thing that is by all means magical realism isn't magical realism. Wave Runners is fucking dope, by the way. I don't know much about the English translation. It might be very difficult to get, but That was basically the first series of novels that I read as a kid, and holy shit, they are still good. Strangely enough, a novel's status as serious and good literary fiction that is elevated above the rest correlates directly with its age and success, right? For instance, Moby Dick didn't even sell 5,000 copies when it came out, because the main character was dead before he could write the book, and that was against the rules of literary fiction. That was basically a fantasy element back in those days. So the lit fascists said, no, this is not literature, this is pulp. And now it's Moby Dick, and everybody knows it, and it's one of the biggest works of literature of all time. This is my favorite example, right? H.P. Lovecraft. Many lit fascists of today consider H.P. Lovecraft to be literary fiction, even though he is the guy who principally influenced genre fiction for the writers of the current and the last century, right? The word pulp was practically invented for this by the contemporary lit fascists of H.P. Lovecraft. But now that this is a respected work, and this is a very respected canon of work that everybody fucking loves, now suddenly it's literature. Now it is literature. No, actually, you know what? This is my favorite example. I love this one even more. Tolkien. There are lit fascists today, and it's not few, who consider the works of Tolkien to be high literary fiction. You know, Tolkien, the grandfather and creator of the fantasy genre. But the rest of the fantasy genre, you know the genre that shares all of the tropes with Tolkien, that's filthy genre fiction. That's not good literature. That's just, that's for the rabble. Fucking A Song of Ice and Fire, which is much more complex, much more dramatic, much more layered and deep than Lord of the Rings ever was. That's just filthy genre fiction for the peasants who don't know how to read real books. In 50 to 80 years, both Harry Potter and The Hunger Games will have passed the benchmark of being old enough to be considered literary fiction, and then the lit fascists of the future will consider them to be literary fiction. And the same will happen for Twilight and 50 Shades of Grey, probably even earlier, because erotic fiction is already considered literary fiction, despite being the most vapid and nonsensical genre of bullshit that exists. This whole attitude of old books are good because they are classics. It's the most hilarious shit that I have ever encountered. Oh, I actually enjoyed reading Ulysses. No, you didn't. You've just convinced yourself that you have, because your life is so utterly bereft of joy that you have forgotten what it feels like. The same thing is happening to video games, by the way, right? The hip, new, cool genre. There was always considered shit, not real entertainment, not really intellectually valuable. You know all the people who say that back in the 80s and 90s, that's where the real games came out for the serious gamers, right? Like Contra. Have you ever played Contra? It's garbage. It's too difficult, and it's not too difficult because the creators decided, hey, let's give a challenge to serious gamers. It's difficult because the creators didn't know how to design a fucking video game back in those days. So if you're the type of grown-up adult who is too smart, too academic, too educated, too intellectual to read anything but the finest literary fiction, only the best, no genre rabble, no fantasy or science fiction for the plebs, know that you are also an elitist cunt who will probably die of disgust in your 50s because you saw people having fun in the park. So how about we drop the bullshit? How about we drop the bullshit distinction between literary fiction and genre fiction? Because everybody knows that genre fiction can be just as good or terrible as regular literary fiction. Of course, we can still differentiate between like complex stories with deep character development and all that, and just pulp. But that distinction is not going to be literary versus genre, because with all the highly complex fiction that you can find in genre and all the utter drivel that you can find in literature, that classification isn't really doing its job as that. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna edit this video and then write some genre fiction. Because genre fiction is fun. And I can. Until then, do check, the Twitter and make the subscribe and the like and all the usual stuff. Also, I've been told to get a PayPal.me link because people wanted to send me money. So I put that in the description. If you really feel like you want to buy me a beer or something, I don't know, drop me like $2 or $3. You're under no obligation to do this. I will love you all the same. Do it if you feel like it. There's going to be my Christmas video is going to come out on the 20th, and there's going to be another video coming out between Christmas and New Year's, but it's not going to be about politics or philosophy or religion or all that shit. I'm too exhausted to deal with that stuff anymore this year. We're going to get back into that whole circuit next year when I'm back from my holiday and I'm pumped to tackle some of those issues. I will be gone for the holidays, like seriously gone. I will not check my YouTube channel, my social media, nothing. I won't even be on the internet probably. The only way that you will be able to reach me is if you're a close personal friend of mine and you have my phone number. Which probably isn't that many of you, right? Because I like to take these media sabbaticals, these internet sabbaticals from time to time, because otherwise it just gets so fucking overwhelming. It's just so much to deal with. I'm really sorry if that bothers you, but that's how I handle things, and I highly recommend it from time to time. Just a couple days of hanging out with somewhere else with friends. Not necessarily at home, because what are you gonna fucking do at home? But yeah, basically that. So yeah, other than that, see you around, cunts.